Hello and welcome to another edition of Inside the Process. Different than the Piano for My Friends Hour, or as it was called before, the Escape from Home Piano Hour, which is an hour of solid playing. I bring you into my world experiences, sometimes ideas and thoughts about making music. And thank you for those of you who have been with me and who support and encourage me. If you're inclined to take a look at it, you'll see the link to the support page of my website where there are options, the options you would expect. PayPal, Venmo, Patreon, and a mailing address. But most importantly, thank you for being here. I'm liking this idea of sharing this. We've been doing it for a while now, and I keep finding things to talk about, which I knew would happen, even though I didn't realize it at the time. Maybe these days leaning a little more on experiences, because I've been doing this my whole life, and there are experiences. There are experiences within my, circle of things. I can't drop a lot of big names or anything like that, but I think really big names, no big names, big venues, small venues, all those experiences have much in common. We all learn from them, and as I say, the stage is the school. So today or tonight, a place where you don't necessarily think of when you think of stage, although some people do, which is the church. And the title of this is Tiny Towns and Remote Places. So I didn't reference the idea of church in the title. But what wound up happening is in my 20s, I created kind of a niche market for myself, traveling around to small churches and small towns in remote places and doing concerts for churches or for the community sponsored by the church. And to back up a little bit, from early on in my playing, I've always been a church musician. In recent years, I haven't done that officially since 1990, except for a 3-year window when I had a half-time position at the Church of the Nazarene in Chestertown, Maryland, as worship arts director. But after 1990, I retired from official church ministry. I was the only 30-year-old that I had served the church in New Jersey, the church I grew up in. I became the organist and then music director when I was 19 years old, and had served in that position for 11 years. And in 1990, when I was 30, and I was traveling around a lot more, in part related to what I'm going to talk about, actually in large part at the time, but figuring that my career path had taken me away from being able to reliably be home every week, so I retired from church music ministry. The only 30-year-old I've ever heard of who got a retirement dinner at the church. I didn't get a gold watch. I guess you can't finagle that for a 30-year-old, but I did get a plaque. And when I took the position at the Nazarene Church for those 3 years, I hung that retirement plaque up in my office, and it was kind of fun or funny or just cute. But anyway, that idea of playing service music and being involved in that has always been a part of me. And it just kind of happens, it happened that it was here and I didn't take it away on purpose, is a bulletin, but it's really a sheet of paper program, from one of the recent Vesper services at Heron Point. And I'm privileged, blessed really, to play those services every week. And when we had the pandemic, after a while of not knowing what to do, the chaplain began broadcasting the services with no attendance, and I wasn't allowed on the facility, but I recorded the hymns and sent them in. So with minimal disruption for the last several years, facilitated by Chaplain Ann, I've been the regular Vespers pianist, and that's been great for me. It kind of scratches that itch. Because when I say church musician, it's coming from the old culture. I was never engaged by contemporary pop music on any side of any fence. Well, I can't say never engaged. It was never the primary thing that brought me in. There are certainly contemporary tunes and music and artists that I enjoy, but I found where my heart led me and all of that. So I don't know what's going on in the contemporary culture. So not being involved in a general public, more contemporary church, I get to continue to live in my bubble at the retirement community, which is kind of how I came up in the 70s and 80s and 90s doing this. That was a more long-winded illustration than I intended to give, but that's okay. And that's why those Sunday evening hymns come up, because it's another way to scratch that itch. This is not a Facebook page devoted to, that exclusively or perhaps even primarily. That's just a piece of me. But interestingly, the culture, denominational culture that I came up in, didn't have a lot of those Fanny Crosby and Beyond hymns, like the one I posted last Sunday, Count Your Blessings. That wasn't in our hymn, though we didn't do that. It was much more, much more formal that way. But I'm, doing the Sunday evening hymns and more of a broad reach to everyone's experiences, and those other hymns are fun to play. And I haven't figured out yet how to really put a good groove to A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. Someday I will. I don't like that. I'll come up with something. A waltz, maybe? I don't know. I'm getting ahead of myself or behind myself, or just beside myself, which I often am. So the Sunday evening hymns come from that piece of me too, which is a piece of me that most don't see these days. Now on Facebook, everybody kind of sees it because it's out there whether you want to see it or not with those Sunday evening hymns. But what I would do, starting in my early 20s, is design programs for churches and then go market them, promote myself to individual churches. And if you saw this stream some weeks ago, well, it was a live stream at the time, about like learning sales techniques and sales strategies and the lead book and the contacts and the periodic things and reminders, all of that came into play to build eventually this pretty large network of small churches. I didn't need a big stage. I just need somebody to let me in the door, right? And began driving first in my local area and then like East Coast up and down. And then it expanded from there. And for context, the first recording album that I self-released was in 1986 on cassette, back when we did it that way, and it was a Christian hymn arrangement album. The first CD I did when I transferred to digital was in 2000, called Hymn and Christian Song Improvisations. So that sort of marker is there in the beginning of all of that. And then I've recorded, I don't know, counting the cassettes, actually, I need to count this up. It may be like 14 or 15 self-releases. And 3 of them are projects that come from the church. One I haven't talked about yet, and it's going to get its own hour on this series, which is a cool project. So for those recordings, I would take hymns or popular Christian songs at a time. This is dated now, and just have fun with them. Like I do for Sunday evening hymns. Like, I don't remember what key I used to play this one in, but let's see. Let's try this key. That's fun. And if you didn't know that title, Heaven Came Down and Glory Filled My Soul. And that's on that 2000 release, Hymn and Christian Song Improvisations, which I still have some copies of. It's not on digital formats, but if you're interested in that, message me and I can send one to you. But for the concerts that I marketed in churches, they were primarily jazz piano programs. So his history of jazz, it was designed really to, be able for a church to have interaction with people in the community who, wouldn't come for a church thing, but will come for something else. Just kind of a lighthearted thing. And like I say, I began driving around and kind of enjoyed it. And one thing led to another. And before long, I was taking really long driving trips. And it was kind of fun. Don't fence me in. Yeah. As maybe you can tell, my mind is going all over the place, even more than usual. And one thing, is that possible? One thing that I meant to say after the first song, Heaven Came Down and the Lord Filled My Soul, is I haven't played that in a long time, and it hadn't occurred to me to include that in the Sunday evening hymn roster. And at this point, many more people see those hymns than see this particular stream or series. So you'll be on the inside. Don't be surprised if that shows up now that I got it back in my awareness. And did you notice what I did with it? I did this purposely at the time. I took it from Vince Guaraldi's Red Baron and stuck it in there. Yeah, that stuff is fun. So I would go around to these small churches and start with ragtime music, like you've heard me do, little sticky things, and go into stride piano. And for me, the stride piano has always been centered on Fats Waller, because that's kind of where I came in. Oh, let me play a little Fats Waller tune. No, that's not it. That wants to go in a Twinkle Little Star. That was last night's show, not this. All right, let's start over. honeysuckle rose. So I don't remember what year it was. I was in my early 20s. And I took out kind of an advertisement. I don't think I paid for it. I was able to arrange to have a featured article in our church denominational monthly magazine, okay, about this concert I was doing, primarily on the East Coast. And I think by that time I had done a few things on the West Coast as well, flew out. It's like, okay, what can we do with this? So ran this little ad, and, and this is actually a side trip. I had forgotten about this, and now it just comes to mind. And it was not without controversy. I got like a scathing letter from somebody about, bringing jazz into the church, thing. And it's like, okay, but most importantly, I got a response from a little church in Nebraska, in Fort Calhoun, Nebraska, and it became a nice association with a now passed on minister in the larger Presbyterian church, Dale Sanders. And he wanted to bring me out. And so that first, I'm a little confused about the chronology here, but I know that first time I was able to make a few more connections and facilitated the trip, which I think was a driving trip. Not positive, but I think it was. But then one thing led to another and another, and I began picking up this network of churches in Nebraska, Kansas, and North and South Dakota. And the Dakotas actually became a primary spot. And picked up little things other places as well. But what would happen is, and at this point, our oldest was just a toddler, and it's like, hey, stick him in the car seat. We're going to go on the road for a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, whatever. And it was cool. And that was the time when I was thinking, maybe the goal, of course this was my goal, not my wife's, was, let's not worry about buying a house. Let's get an RV and let's just go around and let's do let's do the tour thing. That didn't happen, which is a good thing, I think. But we would get a car. In fact, a friend loaned us a car for one of the trips, which is very helpful. And we would go for 2-3 weeks at a time and just hit these small churches and do these shows and everything. So as it turns out, now my notes are not super organized here, but as it turns out, the Dakotas, like I said, became like a primary place, and talk about tiny towns in remote places. I think one of the towns, not that I played, but that I drove through to get to a tiny town that had like 50 people or something that I did play, and I may be wrong, but I haven't checked in many years, Marshall, North Dakota. I think the population was 2, and they were the people who lived over the post office. When you live on the eastern shore of Maryland, which I didn't at the time, but you think this is like, wide open in God's country and stuff. Oh man, when you get out to the Midwest, like the Dakotas, and I haven't driven west of the Dakotas, so I hear it even gets more so. But in North Dakota, it's just kind of driving on the moon at certain places where you don't have any evidence that anyone else was there before you. Like, telephone poles, you don't see houses. It's just a road you're driving on, which may or may not be paved, right? And I don't know. I just found that so. It just, yeah. Whatever the word is, I can't find. I remember seeing a poster in somebody's office, and it said like the Dakotas, life in the vast plain, VAST. I like that. But I also like the idea of driving on the moon, except you can breathe and your car can still pollute, huh? Except that there are no small towns on the moon, and there are in the Dakotas. Uh, well, small towns. Well, where I live here, you would consider, and I don't live in town, I live outside of that, but Chestertown, Maryland, in the big scheme of things, to be a small town. It's like 5,000 and change. But in our little region and in our county, it's the big city. It's the biggest town for 30 miles in any direction. It's the county seat, and if you're going to go shopping, to the extent that you can, or go to a restaurant or whatever, little tiny towns have some things too, but Chestertown is the hub. Out in the Dakotas, once you get away from Bismarck, you get to Lemon, South Dakota, which is 3 hours from Bismarck, and I think the population is under 2,000, so it's like a third the size of Chestertown, maybe. And it's the biggest town for 3 hours in any direction. I don't think there's anything remotely the size of Lemon that I can remember until you get to Bismarck, which is kind of actually a city. And we spent some time in Lemon. I didn't write this down. Now all these memories are coming back. You know when I say don't drink the water when you go overseas? I would say don't drink the water in the Dakotas. Oh man, did I get a case of intestinal problem. Remember, I did a presentation in the school assembly, in one of those, not Lemon, I think it was Dodge, tiny town. You go to public school, and like the water in the water fountains actually kind of brown and thick. And it's like, well, everybody else drinks it, I'll drink it too. No, you have to develop like immunities or something before you can do that. So don't drink the water out there, or the one motel we stayed in Lemon, a nice place, but you can never feel you get clean. I think I wasn't intending to go there. What I was going to say is there's a restaurant in Lemon, South Dakota, and somebody told me back then, because this is like in the 80s, right? And then so everyone in town, every man in town thinks they're John Wayne, right? So you know how most of them are dressed, right? Which wasn't me, so we were standing out. And our little guy was 2 years old, whatever, Joe Jr. And at one point, we're in a table in the restaurant, and we blink, and he runs away, and he's standing at another table, looking up at this guy in all his, John Wayne gear, and he said, "Are you a real cowboy?" Joe, come here, you're embarrassing us, kind of thing. No, not really. But all kind of cute stories that I could tell. I'll spare them, except for one about taking a small child out on a long trip like that, especially one who's inclined to go off on their own, get into trouble, and kind of thing. So maybe our first trip out there, and we're outside of Underwood, North Dakota, but we're way outside. We're in a private home and a farm, and you got to drive down this dirt road for several miles off the main road before you get there. And we're getting settled in on the first day, and I guess my son had already had enough. We couldn't find him anywhere, and we look, and he's walking down the lane, and we ran after him. It's Joseph. What are you doing? He said, "Oh, I want to go home. I'm walking home now." No, you can't do that. walking my baby back to the house, not home from North Dakota. Excuse me, 1 second. I'm always forgetting things or realizing things after I'm supposed to realize them. So that takes care of that. Yeah, so this goes into the category now of experiences that you can have being a musician that are unique to that. And I've said before, when you come up as a musician, because you don't do it because it's the way you think you can make the most money, because it's not like about being rich and famous. It's about finding a contribution, finding a way to make it work. And so there isn't the savings account that funds the fancy vacations, right? But what there is the opportunity to do stuff. I talked about that, those package weekends that the Madeira brothers would do for years in Avalon, New Jersey, the Golden Inn, and how that was a few times a year our family's little trip to the beach in the off season. We didn't care that it was winter. You could still go out to the beach and collect shells, and there weren't crowds, and it was great. And this was not before the other kids were born. This was just my wife and I and our son. But we got to go places and do things that we probably wouldn't have gotten a chance to do. There's a picture somewhere, I've seen it recently, at Mount Rushmore, of taking our little guy to see it, or as he called it, Mount Mushmore. But that's in South Dakota. Yeah, would we have gotten there? No. So it's actually cool. But one of the all right, fine, we'll do this one now. One of the more surreal, strange, sad, lonely, almost angst-filled experiences I had came driving late at night on the little 2-lane road to connect you from one town to another that might be hundreds of miles away. And in North Dakota, it was the fall of 1993. The Phillies were in the World Series, and I'm from the greater Philadelphia area, and I think, where did we live at the time? We were still in the Philadelphia media market, but to the extent I had a baseball team, it was the Phillies. And the Phillies were in the World Series and against the Toronto Blue Jays. And if you have to be kind of rabid baseball fan at this point to remember that they had a relief pitcher, Mitch Williams, I think was his name, the Wild Thing. And he was an effective relief pitcher, but occasionally his accuracy was challenged. Like he, I think, could throw a ball at the plate and it wind up in the stands and not at the plate. The Wild Thing they called him. And in '93, the Phillies were in the World Series, and I was out in Lemon, South Dakota, driving back to Bismarck, which is a 3-hour drive. And it was Game 6 of the World Series that night. And I got done the concert, and I'm in the general store buying something before I leave to drive back in the rental car to Bismarck. And the World Series is on the television behind the counter. I'm like, look, it's like 6th inning or something. And I'm like, cool. I can put it on the radio, because of course no cell phones, no anything, right? And I can listen to my team. Cool. And so we're driving, and if you know the 1990 World Series, you know what happened. I think it was Curt Schilling who was the starting pitcher, and he was doing just fine. But in the 9th inning, for whatever reason, the manager decided to take him out. I think it was Curt Schilling, could be wrong, and put in Mitch Williams to close the game, right? And at that point, I think it was the Blue Jays 3 games, the Phillies 2, so they had to win that game to force a 7th. And I remember it was controversial even among the announcers at the time. Why are you putting the Wild Thing in? Schilling's doing just fine. And I don't think Schilling was happy with it, but he did. Because I'm not seeing this, I watched video of it later. But I'm driving, and everything's going along just fine. It's the bottom of the ninth inning. Mitch Williams is there to secure the win, but there's people on base, and if you don't know what happened, you can probably guess right now that he gave up a home run, and at that moment the Phillies lost the World Series. And there is no stranger feeling than having your team lose the World Series and you are alone in a car driving on the moon. There's no one you can talk to. There's no one you can commiserate with. There's nothing you can do but continue to drive on the moon. I guess that just sounds silly, but it was the weirdest thing. Anyway. For what it's worth. So I remember one town that I was in North Dakota once, Dickinson, I think it was. And if you know North Dakota, which why would you? But there are 6 cities, and they're like north and south of each other. Well, one on the west side of the state, one on the east side of the state, and then one or two right in the middle. Bismarck, and then Minot north of Bismarck, right in the center. So off to the side, away from any city, is Dickinson. It's west of Bismarck, and I think a little north, if I remember right. And I was in a little church there, and afterward, I was just standing outside looking around, and confused, because like you have all this horizon, right? So you can see everything, and I see this glow of like a city. That's what it looked exactly like. Way far away. It's like, wait a minute, that could be a city 100 miles north, but that's north, and there's no city north, and with the city's over there. And I'm just standing there looking confused. And one of the guys from the town comes over and says, "Well, Joe, how do you like the Northern Lights?" As close as I've ever gotten to the Northern Lights. So part of me now wants to play Harbor Lights, but I will I will restrain myself. Although I could, but I don't know a song about Northern Lights. Although someday I'd like to go to Alaska or someplace where I could actually see them. That would be really, really cool. So driving in the whole rural scene is really, I love it. But out there are still cities, and there are some really big cities, especially you have to either get around so you're not stuck in them or drive through to get through. Here on the East Coast, and even where I live, it's rural, but it's really close as the crow flies, like 20 miles, to what they call megalopolis, which is like the one kind of big urban suburban area from Boston down to DC, right? And when you live here, you don't have the sense of like when you leave town, you're actually in an open area because you're already in another town in megalopolis, right? But of course, out in the Midwest, it's not there. But we learned the hard way because we decided, and it was a mistake, to drive through the night and keep going. I got sick afterward. I pushed too hard, and I wasn't paying attention that it timed us to start to approach Chicago coming home, the beginning of the morning rush hour, and we had to get from one side to the other, and it was awful. Yeah, we miscalculated on that one. But for all the bad experiences that you can have on the highway, save the bad accident, which fortunately I've never had, I'm still more comfortable driving than flying. In fact, I think I mentioned that the West Coast festivals that I was going to be on now in just a few weeks with the Mediri brothers in Sun Valley, Idaho, and Pismo Beach, California in October next month have been canceled with just minimal notice because of the moving target of COVID restrictions. And part of me is relieved because I haven't flown since 2008. The last time I did a festival, in fact, last time I was in the airplane was coming back from Sun Valley to Philadelphia. Or not Sun Valley, with the airport, Boise. Yeah, but that's the airport. And I don't like what air travel was becoming by then. And I get the sense that it's just become worse. And I seriously considered driving cross country to do them. But just felt it was a little too much to drive by myself, and I get narcoleptical as well. But of course, I already have plane tickets that are being held for next year for them. But still, part of me wants to find a way to drive next year, especially if I had somebody to go with me. I've never driven all the way across the country. I've driven several times out like halfway. And to the western part of Nebraska, I think, and the western part of North Dakota, and that's as far as I've gotten. Never gotten to Montana, never got that far, or a little south, and never taken Route 66, which I've looked up and discovered it's actually a pretty dangerous road, and I'm not sure I want to. But if I ever do the cross country drive, I gotta get on it at least for a few miles, you know. Yeah. Those driving trips, though, ended abruptly when I was scheduling another trip out, got churches booked and everything, and I guess it was in the early 90s, and my oldest son was either in pre-K or kindergarten. I actually think it was pre-K, but just to be safe, I'm going to say it was kindergarten. And nowadays, they have these mandatory attendance policies at school, and you have to jump through hoops, and show notes and beg before school boards, to miss all but a couple of days. I remember when I went to school, I just, if I went more than 2 or 3 days in a row, I figured I needed a day off. I'd walk back from the school bus and not go. I missed a lot of school, and I wasn't expecting to be told by our principal that no, you can't take your son on this trip for 2 weeks because he will miss too many days of kindergarten and we're going to fail him. So, okay, you're going to threaten to fail my kid if we take this trip, and that's what stopped the trips. And I flew out for a while, and then just kind of moved on to other things, because part of the fun was taking the drive. So I hope this has been amusing or not totally boring, or that you're actually still here. But I thought it would be fun to share these stories with you. Keep in touch via my website. Know that on my main YouTube channel, and I know I make these actually difficult to find, this particular series, because it's on a YouTube channel nobody knows about, and every year it changes to another new YouTube channel nobody knows about. But it's just a way for me to segregate videos. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm going to keep doing it. Old dog, new tricks, all that. So you'll find this here every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. And then on my main channel every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Main channel was Joe Holt's Notes, the Piano for My Friends Hour. So thanks so much. Hope this wasn't too ridiculous. See you later.